The moment I stepped into the lawyer's office, the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. I wasn't prepared for the way Heather was looking at me. Her smile was calm, polite, almost friendly, but there was something chilling beneath it, something that made my stomach tighten. It wasn't just the room or the paperwork on the table that made me uneasy. It was the way she carried herself, the way she looked at me like she already had me figured out. Ethan sat beside her, quiet, almost uncomfortable. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he avoided my gaze. He had always been the kind of man who didn't like confrontation, but this felt different. It felt like he was torn between loyalty to his mother's memory and the subtle pressure of his wife's expectations. I tried to focus on the reason I was here, the last things Linda had left behind, but the unease wouldn't let me. Heather's hands rested on the table, fingers lightly tapping, as if she were in control of the room. I noticed every little glance she gave Ethan, every small shift in her posture. She was testing the waters, seeing how far she could push without me noticing. My mind raced back to the last few months of Linda's illness, to the quiet ways Heather had tried to insert herself into our family's decisions. I had brushed off some of it at the time, thinking it was just normal in-laws adjusting, but now it made sense. The lawyer called us to order, and I could feel every word from her mouth echo in the room. Assets, property, bank accounts, everything that Linda and I had built together was on the table. Heather nodded politely, jotting down notes, but I could see the calculation behind her eyes. It wasn't about respecting Linda's wishes. It was about positioning herself to gain the most. I tried to keep my emotions in check. Grief was still raw, the loss of Linda hitting me like waves I couldn't control. But beneath the sadness, a spark of awareness was growing. I realized that this was more than just an inheritance meeting. It was a test, a challenge, and Heather had stepped into it with a quiet confidence that sent chills down my spine. I glanced at Ethan again. He looked away, fiddling with the edge of his chair. He wanted to do the right thing, I could tell, but he seemed unsure how to stand up against his wife. The thought of Heather manipulating my son, of using his love for her to get what she wanted, angered me. But I stayed still, quiet. Observing. Waiting. By the time the lawyer began reading the will, I had already made a decision in my mind. I wouldn't rush or confront anyone just yet. Heather thought she had the advantage, that she could glide through this meeting with her cold smile and subtle manipulations. But I knew better. I could feel it in every glance, every movement in that room. Something was off, and I intended to find out exactly what it was. The meeting went on, the words blending into a background hum, but my attention never left Heather. Each small action she made told me a story she didn't want anyone else to hear. She believed she had already won, but I wasn't so sure. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Even before Linda got sick, I had noticed little things about Heather that didn't sit right with me. At first, I thought I was imagining it, maybe I was just being overly protective. But the signs were there. The way she would casually comment on how much money certain things cost, or how she would joke about whether our family had enough for her and Ethan. Nothing outright, just small, carefully placed remarks that made me uneasy. I thought about how she always seemed to insert herself into decisions that weren't hers. Whether it was planning family trips or discussing property, Heather had a way of steering the conversation so she came out ahead. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone not paying close attention, but to me, it was clear. She liked control. She liked knowing she could influence outcomes. And I realized, with a sinking feeling, that this control wasn't just about everyday life. She wanted control over money, over inheritance, over everything my wife and I had built. Flashbacks came to me like a sudden wave. Family dinners where Heather would make little digs, calling a meal overpriced, commenting that our home was bigger than we really needed, or laughing at some of my ideas as if they were silly. At the time, I had brushed it off. She was young, I told myself. Maybe she just didn't understand. But now, in the quiet of my grief, I saw the pattern. She was laying the groundwork, testing me, testing Ethan, seeing what she could get away with. I started to worry about Ethan. He had always been kind, trusting, and perhaps a little too eager to avoid conflict. Heather knew that. She knew she could influence him. And as I thought back on their conversations, I realized she had been slowly shaping his perspective, convincing him that certain things were acceptable, that he could take more than what was rightfully his without feeling guilty. The thought made my chest tighten. I loved my son, but I couldn't ignore the possibility that he might be manipulated into betraying his mother's memory, or mine. I made a quiet promise to myself. No matter how clever Heather thought she was, I wouldn't let her take what Linda and I had worked so hard for. I wouldn't confront her rashly or make a scene in front of Ethan. I would watch, I would gather my thoughts, and I would protect what was ours. This wasn't about revenge yet, it was about guarding the legacy Linda and I had built. Every memory, every sly remark, every small manipulation Heather had made before Linda passed became part of a larger picture in my mind. The pieces were falling into place, and for the first time I understood the true extent of what we were facing. I didn't need to speak out loud. I just needed to be ready. Heather thought she could quietly take control, but I would not allow it. And deep down, I knew that my vigilance would be the first step in setting things right. The room was silent except for the lawyer's voice as he began reading Linda's will. Each word felt heavier than the last, each sentence a reminder of what we had lost, and what Heather seemed determined to take. She leaned slightly toward Ethan, whispering just enough for him to hear. Her words were carefully chosen, subtle, but clear in their intent. She wanted him to push for more, to argue for a larger share than what was fair or legally hers. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between honoring his mother's memory and listening to his wife. He opened his mouth, then closed it, his hesitation obvious. It was a quiet, painful betrayal, not something loud or dramatic, but enough to make my heart ache. I felt a mixture of grief and anger wash over me. The pain of losing Linda was still raw, but now it was layered with the sting of watching someone manipulate my son for selfish gain. Heather's smirk was subtle but sharp, like a knife hidden behind a friendly mask. She thought she was in control, that she had Ethan wrapped around her finger. The confidence in her expression was infuriating. It wasn't just about money, it was about power, control, and the audacity to challenge the memory of my wife so openly. Every time she glanced at me, I felt her reading me, testing me, daring me to react. I stayed calm, keeping my face neutral, my body still. My mind, however, was racing. The betrayal was not sudden, I had sensed it coming. But seeing it play out so openly, hearing Heather's manipulations whispered into my son's ear, was another level of heartbreak. I wanted to speak, to call her out, to defend Linda's memory, but I knew that a reaction in that moment could give her exactly what she wanted. Instead, I focused on observing, taking in every glance, every gesture, every subtle tactic she used. The lawyer continued reading, unaware of the tension in the room. Heather's plan seemed bold, but I could see the cracks forming, the uncertainty she tried to hide. Ethan's discomfort was growing, his silence a small rebellion against her influence. It gave me a quiet sense of hope, but it didn't lessen the sting of the attempted betrayal. By the time the reading was over, I had made a decision in my mind. I would not confront Heather immediately. I would not react impulsively or let anger dictate my actions. Instead, I would watch. I would understand her fully, see how far she was willing to go, and prepare myself for what came next. Her smirk told me she believed she had the advantage, that she had already won the first round. But I had learned something in those quiet moments. Patience and careful observation could be more powerful than any immediate confrontation. Heather thought she had started something she could control, but I knew better. I would wait, silently, and let the story unfold. And when the right moment came, I would act, not in anger, but with the clarity and precision that this betrayal demanded. After the inheritance meeting, I couldn't stop thinking about Heather and what she was capable of. I needed to understand who I could trust and who might be swayed by her manipulations. I started testing loyalties quietly. With Ethan, I would bring up small things, mentions of family heirlooms, casual comments about certain bank accounts, even jokes about property that I knew were important to Linda. I watched him carefully, paying attention to how he responded. Each hesitation, each glance at Heather, told me more than words ever could. During this time, I leaned on my oldest friend, Paul. He had been like a brother to me for years and had always known Linda and me well. Over coffee one morning, I told him what I had been observing. Paul didn't sugarcoat it. He warned me that Heather was clever, ambitious, and patient. She wouldn't stop until she got what she wanted. His words were blunt, but they confirmed my fears. I wasn't imagining things. Heather was quietly, steadily trying to take control. Heather's manipulations became more obvious with each passing day. In private moments, she would lean on Ethan, planting ideas about what was fair or deserved. I saw him struggle, torn between love for his mother and his loyalty to his wife. It was painful to watch. I could feel the tension building in our home, a quiet storm that threatened to overturn everything Linda and I had built. I began to feel trapped, as though I was constantly navigating a maze I didn't fully control. Heather's charm, her quiet confidence, and her subtle pressure made it hard to confront her directly without causing more damage. I realized that if I wanted to protect our family's legacy, I couldn't act impulsively. I needed a plan, a careful, measured approach that would expose her intentions without giving her the upper hand. At the same time, I started observing the little signs in the house, which drawers Heather lingered near, which items she commented on, and even the tone of her voice when she spoke to Ethan. Everything mattered. Every small detail helped me understand her strategy. I began to piece together how much she had been influencing our family behind the scenes, and it left a bitter taste in my mouth. By the end of these quiet observations, I came to a clear conclusion. Heather was patient, calculating, and ruthless. If I wanted to protect what Linda and I had built, I couldn't rely on luck or hope that Ethan would stand up to her on his own. I had to be ready. My grief remained, but it was joined by a determination I hadn't felt before. I silently acknowledged that revenge might be necessary, not out of anger, but out of necessity. Heather had underestimated me. She thought her quiet tactics and subtle manipulations could go unnoticed, that she could bend my family to her will. But I was learning, watching, and preparing. And when the time came, I would act in a way she would never expect. While going through some of the family accounts, I noticed things that didn't make sense. Certain transfers had been made before the inheritance meeting, money moving from one account to another without explanation. At first, I thought it might be a mistake, but the more I checked, the clearer it became. Heather had been quietly moving assets, positioning herself to take advantage of the situation. That cold smile she had given me in the lawyer's office suddenly made sense. It wasn't arrogance. It was confidence. She knew exactly what she was doing. I felt a mixture of anger and disbelief. The betrayal was deeper than I had imagined. But I knew I couldn't act rashly. Heather's moves had to be handled carefully. I started to gather evidence discreetly, documenting transfers, keeping notes, and checking accounts for anything unusual. I didn't tell Ethan anything, knowing he could still be influenced by Heather's charm. She couldn't know that I was onto her. Every step I took had to be quiet, controlled, and precise. Grief was still heavy on me. Linda's absence left a constant ache, and seeing her memory used as leverage made it worse. But I realized that grief could also give me focus. Instead of letting it overwhelm me, I channeled it into strategy. Every detail I uncovered became part of a larger plan. I began thinking several steps ahead, anticipating Heather's moves, and preparing for them in silence. I started planning how to regain control without raising suspicion. Heather had grown used to thinking she was clever and untouchable. She believed her actions were hidden, that she was in charge. That gave me an advantage. I could let her think she was winning while I quietly built the path to stop her. The satisfaction of watching someone overconfident underestimate you is powerful, and I needed to use it carefully. During this time, I paid even closer attention to Ethan. He was still torn but more aware now. I made small, casual comments about family assets, about what Linda would have wanted, and observed his reactions. I didn't push him or accuse him. I just let him see that I was paying attention, letting him understand, in small ways, that Heather's control wasn't absolute. The more I uncovered, the more determined I became. Heather thought she had planned everything perfectly, but she hadn't counted on me noticing the patterns. Each document, each transfer, each small irregularity became part of the story I was quietly building. By the end of those weeks, I had a clear plan in my mind. I would act carefully, using patience instead of force, allowing Heather to think she was in control. I would protect the family legacy, expose the manipulations, and ensure that Ethan would see the truth before it was too late. Quietly, deliberately, I would turn the tables. Heather believed she had the advantage, but she didn't know that the real game had only just begun. I started making small changes, quiet ones that Heather wouldn't immediately notice. Certain assets were redirected, accounts that had been jointly controlled were closed or moved into places only I could access. I made sure every step was legal, careful, and untraceable to anyone except me. The goal wasn't to confront her yet, it was to regain control slowly, quietly, without giving her the satisfaction of knowing I had acted. Heather began to notice little things were shifting. Bills were being paid differently, statements didn't arrive where she expected, and certain decisions no longer went through her. She tried to figure it out, her calm mask showing the faintest signs of strain. I could see it in the way she glanced at me, her lips tightening for a fraction of a second before she forced her usual polite smile. She was unsettled, but she still didn't know why. That was exactly where I wanted her. Tension started rising in the house. Small confrontations cropped up, not loud arguments, just subtle exchanges that revealed the strain. Heather would ask Ethan questions about money or property, and I would quietly intervene, making neutral comments that steered him back to what was right without causing conflict. Ethan was still torn, still confused, but he began to see that things were changing, that his father wasn't blind to what was happening. Balancing grief, anger, and patience was harder than I expected. Some days, I wanted to lash out, to call Heather out in front of Ethan, to make her pay for all the manipulation and disrespect. But I reminded myself that impulsive actions would only give her an advantage. Every decision had to be measured, every move precise. Grief gave me focus, anger gave me motivation, and patience gave me the edge. I started keeping a careful schedule of all the changes I made, noting which assets had been shifted, which accounts closed, and how Heather reacted to each move. Even the smallest gestures counted. I watched her frustration grow in subtle ways, slight hesitation when she opened her laptop, tense glances when she realized a plan she had counted on wasn't going to work. It was satisfying, but I stayed quiet, letting her think she was still in control. By the end of the week, I could see the first cracks forming in her confidence. Heather had always relied on her ability to manipulate and predict others, but she hadn't anticipated me taking quiet, deliberate steps while remaining invisible. She was beginning to feel pressure, and I could sense the first seeds of doubt forming in her mind. I knew the real battle was just beginning, but for the first time since Linda passed, I felt a measure of control. The house felt less like a place where Heather held sway and more like a place where careful strategy and patience were shifting the balance. Heather believed she was winning, but with every quiet move I made, the advantage slowly, invisibly, moved back to where it belonged. Heather's calm confidence finally cracked one evening. I could see it in the way she looked at the family accounts, the statements, and the changes I had quietly made. She realized that things were not going according to her plan. Her subtle smirk faltered, replaced by frustration and disbelief. It was clear to me that she had underestimated how carefully I had been watching, planning, and acting. Later that day, she confronted me directly. Her voice was sharp, almost accusing. "Mark, what have you done with the accounts? Why are these changes happening without telling me?" she demanded, her usual polite tone replaced by anger. I stayed calm, meeting her glare without raising my voice. I didn't need to argue or justify myself. I let the weight of the evidence speak for itself. My composure unsettled her even more. Ethan was in the room, caught between us. He shifted nervously, glancing at both of us, realizing for the first time the extent of Heather's manipulations. His face went pale as he pieced together the way she had been quietly influencing him to take actions he now regretted. Betrayal hit him like a punch. He had trusted Heather, followed her suggestions, and now he could see how wrong he had been. Guilt mixed with shock, and he avoided Heather's gaze, his silence loud in the tension-filled room. Heather tried to defend herself, claiming she only had the family's best interests in mind. But it was obvious. Ethan's hesitation, the records, the changes, I had taken care to make sure the truth was clear without needing to argue or fight. Heather's attempts to manipulate the situation crumbled under the weight of her own exposure. I stayed steady, letting her vent and lose control while I remained calm. Every word, every defensive gesture she made, only confirmed what I already knew. She had relied too much on her confidence and charm, and she hadn't accounted for patience, careful observation, or strategy. She was rattled, and I had the upper hand. Finally, Heather's expression hardened. Her eyes narrowed, and her voice dropped into a low, dangerous tone. "You haven't seen the last of me, Mark. This isn't over," she said. There was anger, fear, and disbelief all mixed together in her words, but underneath it, I could see she was truly surprised by my resolve. She had underestimated how far I was willing to go to protect what was mine, to honor Linda's memory, and to correct the manipulation she had tried to impose. Ethan remained quiet, still absorbing the truth, still processing the betrayal he had almost unknowingly participated in. Heather, on the other hand, stormed out of the room, leaving me, Ethan, and the weight of the moment behind. She had vowed revenge, but she didn't understand that I was no longer reacting impulsively. I was ready, prepared, and patient. The confrontation was over for now, but the tension lingered. Heather knew she had lost some control, Ethan now saw the truth, and I remained steady, holding the balance carefully. The next steps would matter, but I had shown her that calm strategy and patience could dismantle even the most confident manipulator. I knew it was time to act, and I had to do it carefully. Heather had made her moves, but now the evidence I had quietly gathered gave me the advantage. I met with the lawyer and presented records of the asset transfers, statements, and other documents that showed Heather's manipulations. I framed it carefully, not as an attack, but as a matter of accuracy and protecting the family legacy. The lawyer's eyes widened as he reviewed everything, and I could see the shift in the room as the situation became clear. Heather's confident posture faltered the moment the lawyer called out the irregularities. She tried to explain, to justify, but the evidence was undeniable. Transfers she thought were secret, moves she believed went unnoticed, everything was exposed. Her panic was quiet at first, a subtle tension in her shoulders, but it quickly grew. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it, realizing there was no way to spin the facts. Ethan's expression changed. He looked at Heather, and for the first time I saw him breaking free from her influence. The guilt on his face was clear, he understood how he had been manipulated, how he had almost participated in something unfair. He turned to me, eyes full of apology and relief. I didn't scold him, I simply nodded, letting him know I understood. He didn't need words. The loyalty that Heather had quietly tried to twist back to her favor was gone. He was back on our side, and it was enough to see. I finally felt a measure of control returning. After weeks of grief, manipulation, and subtle games, I could breathe a little easier. Heather's schemes had unraveled, and the family assets were secure. But the victory was quiet. It wasn't about revenge or cruelty, it was about protecting what Linda and I had worked for and ensuring fairness. Grief still lingered, a dull ache reminding me of what had been lost. But there was also a sense of justice, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that patience and careful strategy had prevailed. Heather, on the other hand, was isolated. Her confidence had been shattered. The realization hit her slowly, she had misjudged me, underestimated my patience, and assumed that grief or gentleness would make me easy to manipulate. Her schemes had backfired, and she had no one to turn to. The allies she had counted on, the influence she had over Ethan, were gone. She had acted too soon, too confidently, and it had cost her. For the first time in weeks, the tension in the house lifted. Heather's panic and isolation were clear, and Ethan was finally free to see things as they really were. I allowed myself a moment to reflect. The fight wasn't over in the sense that life would go on, and there would always be challenges. But the immediate threat, the quiet manipulations, and the betrayal had been addressed. The balance had shifted. Heather was no longer the one in control, and I could finally see a way forward. My careful observation, patience, and strategy had turned the tables. She had learned, though too late, that underestimating someone who grieves yet plans wisely is a dangerous mistake. Heather tried to recover from the embarrassment of her schemes being exposed, but it was clear to everyone that she had overstepped. She smiled politely, made excuses, and tried to explain herself, but no one was fooled. Her efforts to salvage her image fell flat, and the family gradually began to see things as I did. Support quietly shifted to my side, not through speeches or arguments, but simply through acknowledgement of the truth. I didn't gloat or call attention to her failures. There was no need. My revenge wasn't about hurting her, it was about correcting the injustice she had tried to create. Every small adjustment I had made, every careful observation, every quiet intervention had worked exactly as planned. The balance had been restored without unnecessary conflict. That was my quiet justice. Ethan approached me one evening, his face full of guilt and regret. "Dad. I see now what she was doing," he said quietly. "I'm sorry I let her influence me. I should have listened to you and remembered what Mom would have wanted." I placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling a mix of relief and pride. He had recognized the manipulation, and acknowledging it made him stronger, more aware of what truly mattered. I reflected on all that had happened, the grief of losing Linda, the heartbreak of seeing my own family manipulated, and the quiet tension that had filled our home for weeks. But despite everything, there was a sense of vindication. I hadn't had to yell, fight, or humiliate anyone. I had preserved my dignity while ensuring that fairness was restored. The lesson was clear: patience, careful planning, and steady observation could accomplish more than anger or rash action ever could. Heather remained in the background, isolated and cautious. She realized she had underestimated me, and the confidence that had driven her earlier actions was gone. It was a quiet victory, not one shouted from the rooftops, but one that carried far more weight. The family understood the truth, and the household slowly returned to a calm balance. Even in quiet, I could feel the satisfaction of justice served. It wasn't about punishment, it was about truth and protection. Linda's legacy, our family's hard work, and the values we had always upheld were safe. That knowledge gave me a sense of peace I hadn't felt in weeks, a small comfort amid grief. The betrayal, the manipulation, and the fear had been real, but so had the strategy, patience, and resolve. I had faced deception without letting it destroy me, and I had restored what mattered most. As I sat quietly, reflecting on the events, I realized that true strength wasn't loud or aggressive, it was steady, thoughtful, and measured. Heather's failure and the family's support reminded me of that truth every day. I could finally breathe a little easier, knowing the legacy of Linda and myself was secure, and that justice had been served calmly, firmly, and with dignity intact. After everything settled, I began slowly rebuilding my life. The grief for Linda never fully disappeared, but I learned to carry it with me in a way that honored her memory. I focused on preserving what she and I had built together and on making decisions that reflected the values we had always held dear. Every step forward felt like a small tribute to her, a way to keep her presence alive in our home and our family. Ethan and I worked on repairing our relationship. The tension from Heather's manipulations had left scars, but honest conversations and shared understanding helped bridge the gap. He acknowledged the mistakes he had made and the influence Heather had tried to exert, and I forgave him, knowing that guilt and regret were heavy enough to carry. Slowly, trust returned between us, and the bond we had before all this turmoil began to feel solid again. Heather no longer had any control over family finances or decision-making. Legal steps ensured she couldn't access accounts, manipulate assets, or influence decisions in any way. The realization that her schemes had failed completely weighed on her, and she was left to face the consequences of her actions without allies or support. Her confidence, which had once been so sharp and unsettling, was gone, replaced by isolation and frustration. The household felt calmer, steadier. Without Heather's manipulations, daily life became easier. The subtle tension that had dominated for months was replaced by a sense of order, safety, and fairness. I could finally focus on rebuilding routines, investing energy into meaningful projects, and restoring the atmosphere Linda would have wanted in her home. Emotionally, the experience left its mark. I had learned that quiet intelligence, patience, and careful observation were more powerful than impulsive reactions. Revenge didn't need to be loud or humiliating to be effective. It could be subtle, deliberate, and still leave a lasting impact. By acting thoughtfully, I had protected the family, restored fairness, and preserved my dignity, all without letting anger control me. Looking back, I realized the ordeal had revealed more than Heather's true nature. It had shown me who in my life was trustworthy, who could be influenced, and how important patience and clarity were in navigating betrayal. It had been painful, exhausting, and at times overwhelming, but it had also been instructive. In the end, I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The family was protected, Ethan was awake to the truth, and Heather could no longer interfere. Life wouldn't be the same as before Linda's passing, but it could still be meaningful, guided by integrity and careful thought. My calm, deliberate approach had safeguarded everything I valued, and it had uncovered the true colors of those around me. I knew the future would bring challenges, but now I faced them with strength, resilience, and the knowledge that thoughtful action and patience could overcome even the most cunning betrayal. The story of loss, manipulation, and quiet revenge had reached its conclusion, leaving behind lessons, restored trust, and the power of steady, intelligent resolve.